Thank you for the kind introduction. I hope to be on time to also allow for a couple of questions, but if you want to have some questions answered in the end, please also refer to the Slack channel that we anyways have open for any questions coming up during the talk as well. Change slides? It is. Okay, so this is going to be about the Regulatory Special Interest Group, which we launched in July 2024. Although the topic suggests otherwise, I think we're not that boring actually. So the topic is quite broad in a sense that there is something in for everybody. I think it's broadly a user group, it's broadly a developer group, and potentially also some group for other people who are interested largely in the topic around regulatory affairs, compliance topics as well. And we needed a space to actually exchange ideas on how to work together, maybe as a community in this case, on making NF Core pipelines more compliant with regulated environments or regulatory needs. And one idea was that we would like to identify gaps that are currently existing in NF Core, identify issues that we currently see from that perspective, and potentially also come up with good strategy and good solutions on solving them and providing developers and users with a guidance on how to actually get that done, how to make these type of things better. So that's a basic motivation that you can take from the talk today, I think. And why NF Core? I mean, I'm a co-founder of NF Core as well, so I'm kind of keen in keeping the connections with the community there. And I also think that NF Core has a very unique setting at the moment that it is kind of a de facto standard driving community for Nextflow analysis pipelines. A lot of people are looking to NF Core how to do Nextflow pipelines properly, how to actually do Nextflow pipelines even in a regulated environment. I mean, we saw the great talk from Ken previously, who was referring to that actually in a different kind of setup. And I think also regulatory authorities and others who are looking and watching this space of how to do bioinformatics today with pipelines better are really considering open source nowadays as being a good example on how to do these things today in 2024, 2025 and ongoing, which is kind of also shifting a bit of a mindset in that kind of space at the moment. I think to sum that up, the timing is just right at the moment to move this forward within NF Core. We just have to take the opportunity there. So many of you may have an academic background, some of you are industry people, some have the background and the needs that come with compliance and regulatory topics, but largely speaking, I really try to keep this a little bit more broad as well here during my talk, that I don't talk too much about the regulated documents and guidelines that are out there, because there's also quite a few views on this actually within the community, but also outside, especially outside. I think you can basically summarize what do we need here as whenever we do anything with bioinformatics analysis that are getting in touch with, for example, decision making or relevant for health decisions, for patient treatments, regulatory topics become important. That's where you really have to make sure whatever analysis you do is really done properly, is really documented properly, is really making sense. You can't just live with something that then ultimately potentially results, for example, in a decision being made wrong for a patient, for example. That's something unacceptable in these type of settings. And that's exactly why we need to talk about these regulated environments, why we need to make sure that NF Core itself also provides measures and methods to make these type of efforts more easy for everybody to actually come up with good standards. There are a couple of guidelines, just to mention a few. A couple of them were already mentioned. I think there was Annick yesterday talking a little bit about their experience with the RNA fusion pipeline from NF Core, which covered a little bit of IVDR, which is like medical devices. We have several ISO standards that are out there, and there's a multitude of others out there as well. So depending on your personal setting, on your setting of your company, on the setting of what you do actually, healthcare provider, big pharma, smaller pharma, biotech startups, multiple of these may apply to your regulation in general. So that's maybe also a key point that people need to understand. It's not like you have a one-shoe-fits-all solution for everything. You will have to look into multiple of these and will have to come up with ideas on how to do proper your work actually. And a lot of these actually don't have bioinformatics pipelines explicitly mentioned anywhere. So a lot of these are actually talking about medical devices. In the case of IVDR, for example, other standards may talk about it a little bit differently. There's multiple view angles. So it's also a bit of the vocabulary. What are people really talking about that we need to kind of at least come up with a good strategy on how to tackle that within the special interest group. So I actually got that nice little graph from Anik's talk yesterday as well, which basically summarizes a couple of the aspects that we need to cover within NF Core. At the moment, I think a lot of this is already coming with NF Core tooling. So if you do a pipeline within the NF Core community, a lot of this is already enforced. So for example, documentation, although I have to say your mileage may vary there. Some pipelines have really good documentation, have a lot of user documentation, a lot of developer documentation, so it's really easy to actually fulfill requirements from that perspective. Traceability is a topic that is also very important. So for software, for example, like where do my tooling and where do my tools come from, how do I package them, things like that are already there, I think, to a large extent within NF Core. But for example, for decisions, why did we do this in this specific way within the NF Core community? These type of things are currently not covered. We're not 100% sure whether this is an absolute need. It depends as well on the regulation you want to fulfill, but that's a topic, yeah. Maintainability is actually something where NF Core, I think, excels quite a lot, because there's usually a multitude of people actually working together, making sure that pipelines that are really frequently used and particularly used in health settings are really maintained by multiple people, multiple institutions, industry/academic partners. So I think that's a good one. Security is a topic that is also kind of inherently covered to some extent, and there were also mentions of, for example, container scanning with the Wave service, for example, things like that. People have that in mind at the moment. So I think these parts are already quite well covered within the NF Core community. So we're not building on nothing, we're actually building on quite some substantial efforts that are already inherently within NF Core. And yes, validation, that's a topic in the end that all people have to do that fall under regulatory topics. So we will have to discuss that a little bit more in detail later in the talk. I tried to explain that already a little bit, that we have a lot of the tooling and the pipelines are actually quite great in many cases, particularly the ones that are well known in the community, like RNA-seq, for example. But authorities really want to gain trust before approval of usage of said pipelines. So one thing is, I think there's one concept that comes back to you whenever you talk about that topic is so-called risk mitigation strategies. So regulatory authorities, for example, will have a look at how is the community behind the pipeline. Is this a single developer somewhere in a basement basically working on this alone? Can we trust that person enough that we really trust that person with doing data analysis on a healthcare situation? Or do we have hundreds of people scattered across the globe that basically all have a common sense of understanding on that pipeline and work jointly together to making this work? The same with versioning, change management, tests, patching, updates, and maintenance. A lot of these things come into play and actually are important or considered important when making decisions whether a pipeline can get validated in such a regulatory setting, I think. And a lot of these things are partially covered, at least within NF Core. We're trying to make that even better, trying to fill gaps where necessary to really help the community in actually making that work. So the pragmatic way we also discussed during the NF Core hackathon in the last couple of days was that we really want to provide an overview on what, why, and how for users, maintainers, but also for regulators and auditors. Flag individual tasks that you would need to do if you want to, for example, validate an NF Core pipeline with relevant cross-references to applicable standards. So, for example, our idea is that we have guidelines which are not as formal as the guidelines that are known in the regulatory space, but probably just flagging points. Where do I find, for example, out how NF Core tests pipelines? These type of things are not always easy to find, particularly if you're not part of the community, particularly if you've never worked on NF Core pipelines. We need to flag these, make them accessible in a way that a regulator, for example, can find these information very quickly on a particular pipeline release, for example. We would really want to highlight also what we already addressed, units, sub-workflow tests, other things that I mentioned here on the page, and a couple of the issues we found or gaps that we think we should be tackling in the next couple of months are already on the list. So our hope is that we really can move this forward in a pragmatic way and then iterate over it and get it better and better and better until we hopefully at some point have something where we really see additional value for the community. Unfortunately, that's not enough. So to be very frank here, this kind of summary of things that we really want to do is unfortunately not going to make it. It's about 75% of the hardworking part, I would say, in terms of that you need to collect all of that information, usually manually at the moment. Our hope is that we can provide something better there. But in the end, what you would then need to do is go back to your institution and, for example, run a full pipeline validation with the test data that you have, with in-house data that you actually intend to have, for example, in a healthcare setting, for example, in a clinical trial. You would need that to run through the pipeline, document what you expect, document what you expect in terms of positive, negative controls, things like that. That's on you in the end, and that will stay and remain the same. The only thing we really want to cover is we want to make the process until that point as easy as possible, because that's also, I think, where a lot of people have very common overlaps in what they need to do to fulfill these requirements. Yeah, so for example, a couple of questions that people typically ask there: are you analyzing blood samples, for example? Is this what you also expect in terms of data soon? Are you using a specific set of parameters or different configuration? Different pipelines have, for example, sub-workflows that do things quite differently. These type of things have to be fixed, so you have to really know exactly which ones you will use in clinical care, for example, at some point, and you need to have some ground truth. So you need to know, for example, is this really a realistic outcome? Is it something that I can, for example, compare to something that was published already? There's initiatives out there against which you can compare. And yeah, we can't really do that within NF Core. It's something you really have to do on an individual institutional level, let's say, or a company level in this case. So the next steps would be that we work on a proof of concept to test this approach and vision that we have at the moment, have this feedback loop situation where we really want to improve the guidelines and recommendations for the community page, and then potentially also ask for input from authorities at some point, for example, for some of the more prevalent pipelines that people are using, like RNA-seq. And then hopefully we will help improving these standards. We also had some outreach happening already with established standards. So for example, the biocompute folks at George Washington University, we had them already participate in one of the regulatory meetings. Our intent to do is this more broadly with other people who have potentially interesting things to talk about. And yeah, that's how we intend to move things forward. I think it's a unique opportunity to actually build and define these type of things now in an open source way, because this has not been done in the past, usually like that. I think it's also a great opportunity to showcase how open source can really change how we think about these topics, can make it easier for smaller units, smaller institutions to also participate in the process. That's something that I really love about this, and we've seen people really chiming in from all over the globe. In the end, that's also hopefully saving time and money and some nerves on a lot of people. So that's exactly what we would like to do, and I think NF Core really outplays a lot of strengths there. Yeah, so I think if you're interested, I'm going to skip the last two slides because they're anyways just highlights on the NF Core regulatory part where you can join on the Slack channel and also on the webpage. I think if you're interested in the topic more, we're also welcoming any contributions, anybody chiming in, anybody participating in our monthly meetings. Just get online, get on the Slack channel, ask and reach out. We are more than happy to have you with us. Thank you.